How to Stay Invisible, Chapter 11. In the early hours of the morning, the temperature dropped and the rain turned to snow. When Raymond woke up, he lay with his eyes closed, relishing the warmth of his new bed. Rosie was asleep next to him. He reluctantly opened his eyes and pulled himself out of the sleeping bag, trying not to wake her. He put on his hoodie, zipped his coat over it, and slipped on his shoes. Outside of the hollow, he stretched and shivered, his muscles protesting against the cold. Raymond ate a Pop-Tart for breakfast. Rosie woke up at the sound of the wrapper, and Raymond offered her the unfrosted edges. He brushed his teeth at the creek and grabbed his fishing gear. Rosie whined, but jumped from the hollow and followed him into the falling snow. He checked his minnow traps and pulled a single minnow from the bottle. There was no sign of the man at the river, but Raymond thought that most people probably don't go fishing when it is snowing out. Then again, most people didn't live in hollowed out trees behind their middle school either. After a few hours, Raymond was wet from head to toe and his legs ached from cold. Rosie had given up scavenging in the snow, which was now sticking to the frozen earth. She was curled at the base of a wide rock covered in snow with her nose tucked under her legs. Raymond alternated hands. He had hoped to catch at least one fish, but so far hadn't had so much as a bite. The clouds hung low and the snow fell in heavy thumb-sized flakes clinging to Raymond's hair and clothes. He thought of the warm new sleeping bag and pulled in his line. "Come on, Rosie," he called, and she happily jumped up and shook the snow from her fur. As Raymond knelt to close his tackle box, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He'd had this feeling before, like when he was being watched. He turned, but he could barely see through the thick snowfall. Raymond stood and squinted, scanning the woods around him. Rosie yipped impatiently. He decided the cold must be getting to him. He picked up his things and followed after her, glancing over his shoulder again before the river was out of sight. At the hollow, he took his wet clothes off and stuffed them at the back of the tree, shivering in the cold. He pulled on dry pants and a t-shirt and zipped himself into the sleeping bag, letting Rosie slide in next to him. He had checked out a copy of the Boy Scouts handbook, hoping it would come in handy. He thumbed the pages before casting it aside. He reached for his fishing knife and began to whittle down a small log that lay at the mouth of the hollow. Raymond had grown very good at this over the last few weeks, passing the time by making small wooden statues of squirrels and fish that he lined up at the back of the hollow. There was even one of Rosie. Today, his stiff fingers struggled to hold the small knife. Eventually, he cast the log aside too and tucked the knife away. It was just too cold, and there was enough light in the hollow to see properly anyway. The next morning, Raymond woke up to an empty tree. He could hear Rosie outside, and he pulled himself to the edge of the hollow to call for her. It had stopped snowing in the night, leaving behind at least 3 inches of powder. Rosie had a freshly dead squirrel in her mouth. She dropped it at the base of the tree and proudly looked up. "Okay, girl," Raymond said. "I get it." She was too skinny, unable to eat the fruit and chocolate that Raymond so often had available. He grabbed the discarded handbook and checked the index. To his extreme dismay, he couldn't find anything about skinning animals or cooking game. He resolved to try anyway. Can't be that hard, right? He retrieved a small stone he had collected from the river. He sharpened his knife on the stone before he began the work of skinning the animal. Raymond remembered watching a few episodes of a survival show with his dad a long time ago where the contestants had to skin a mink. A squirrel was a little smaller than a mink, but couldn't be that different. He tried to steady his hands. After accidentally slicing the tail of the squirrel clean off, he wedged the knife underneath the skin at the tailbone, slowly pulling it back. It took him a few tries, but he managed to pull the skin from the squirrel without many mishaps. He cut off the head and sliced the belly, taking care to remove the entrails without spoiling the meat. Feeling quite accomplished, he skewered the animal with the stick he used to roast fish and held it over the fire. He and Rosie ate squirrel for breakfast. It wasn't the best tasting thing Raymond had ever eaten, but it also wasn't the worst. Get a few more like that, Rosie, and we'll have ourselves a Christmas feast, he told her and laughed. His stomach wasn't even close to being full, but his spirits were up. Rosie licked his face in agreement. On the survival show, the man who skinned the mink had gotten very sick with E. coli and had to be sent home. Raymond couldn't remember if it was from the meat or not, but he remembered he was sent home because Raymond's father had gotten so upset about it that he had thrown a bottle at their TV. The TV didn't break, but there was a bright spot in the middle of the screen after that. If a character on screen moved near the bright spot, they would momentarily disappear and then reappear when they moved away again. He stared into the canopy of frosted trees and patted Rosie's head. After breakfast, Raymond put out the fire, grabbed his fishing pole, and headed back out to the river. He figured if Rosie could have had such good luck, maybe he could too. On the way, Raymond marveled at the snow-covered woods. Everything looked so different, covered in white. It was quieter than usual. Most of the birds had gone for the winter in search of warmer climates. They were almost to the river when Raymond stopped. He had the feeling again that something was watching him. Rosie stopped next to him. Raymond looked around, trying to control his breath, which was now coming in quick, sharp pulls. Somewhere to his right, a tree branch snapped and crashed to the ground, heavy with snow. Raymond jumped. Then, relaxing a bit, he smiled at Rosie. I think the woods are getting to us. But Rosie was staring straight ahead, hackles raised. Raymond followed her gaze. A coyote was standing just 10 yards ahead, blocking their path to the river. Raymond sucked in his breath, feeling the cold air rush into his lungs. Panic surged through his body. The coyote didn't move. He was looking right at them. Then he took a small step forward, and Raymond watched his shoulder blades lift, hot breath making smoke clouds in the air. Rosie emitted a low growling that Raymond had never heard from her before. The coyote took another step. Raymond searched his brain for anything he could remember about coyotes. He had heard stories of them preying on small children or eating family pets. Despite the cold, sweat beaded on his forehead and ran down his neck. His heart was beating out of his chest. Coyotes were stalking animals. Raymond forced his feet to move toward the beast, taking a step forward and fighting every impulse in his body to run as fast as he could in the opposite direction. The coyote stopped, shifting his eyes from the dog to the boy. His head tilted and his tail twitched. Then he lifted his head and let out an ear-splitting yowl that made Raymond jump and scream out. Rosie leaped in front of Raymond, teeth bared. In an instant, the coyote was bounding through the snow straight for them. Raymond dropped his fishing gear and tried to run. He made it about 6 paces before falling face forward into the snow. He could hear the coyote and Rosie wrestling behind him. He flipped himself over quickly, shuffling back. He had to blink several times to adjust to the sight that lay before him. The coyote was bouncing around Rosie, running in circles and jamming his nose into the dog, who was still frozen to the ground, hackles raised, growling and snapping at his advances. The coyote turned and ran a figure 8 in the opposite direction, running at full speed back to where Rosie stood. He slid into her, leaned his head down into her small frame, and threw her easily into the air. Rosie sailed through the air and thumped into the snow. She rolled onto her side just as the coyote leaped over her. He darted back, circling her again. He wasn't attacking, Raymond thought, stunned. He was playing. Raymond sat in the snow, mouth open, watching the ridiculous dance of the bounding ginger beast. Rosie was no longer growling, but she was obviously beyond irritated. She snapped at the coyote, who was jumping over her with ease. He was at least twice her size. Raymond didn't know what to do. He got to his feet, suddenly aware of the wet cold that was permeating the bottoms of his jeans. The coyote halted and swung his head in Raymond's direction. Raymond wasn't sure if his playfulness would extend to humans, and before he could even think better of it, he took a few steps back. The coyote bounded toward him, his great tongue hanging out of his open mouth. With 2 leaps, he closed the distance between himself and Raymond. Raymond closed his eyes and braced for impact, but it never came. When he opened them again, Rosie had her mouth clamped around the coyote's ankle, dragging him away from Raymond. The coyote kicked out, and Rosie released him, yelping in pain, falling into the snow. "Rosie!" Raymond screamed out, and he ran to her. Her right leg was twisted awkwardly under her. Raymond positioned himself protectively over his dog, leaning low and soothing her. She tried to get up and yelped again in pain. Raymond looked up at the beast, who was still waiting eagerly, tail wagging. "Go!" Raymond yelled back. Fear left him, and he was suddenly furious. He stood and waved his arms at the coyote. "Get out of here!" He grabbed a handful of snow and flung it at the animal. The coyote backed up but made no move to leave. Raymond screamed again, a guttural sound even he didn't know he could make. He scooped up his dog and ran back in the direction of the hollow, leaving the coyote behind in the snow-covered woods. By the time he made it back to the hollow, he was soaked from snow and sweat. He laid Rosie gently in the mouth of the tree and bent over her, assessing the damage. "It's all right, girl. I've got you." She had been quiet while Raymond carried her, but whimpered now, licking her hurt leg. Raymond touched it, and she pulled it away from him. "Let me see it, Rosie." The leg didn't appear to be broken, but the skin just above the paw was badly bruised and split open, already swelling. Rosie tried to stand, crying out as she applied weight to it. Raymond tried to keep his voice steady. "Shh, stay down now," he whispered. His thoughts were hazy, and he began to shake uncontrollably. He grabbed the Boy Scout's handbook and flipped to the index. His fingers trembled as he turned page after page in search of a remedy. He scanned the sections on sprains and splints. He wasn't sure if the paw was sprained, though, or simply bruised. There wasn't anything about wound care of animals. He threw the book into the snow. "We have to clean it up." He knew that much. He tried to gather the dog in his arms again, and she protested, flailing back. "We have to clean it!" he yelled, adrenaline still coursing through him. Rosie whined but gave in, allowing him to carry her to the small creek. He knelt by the water and laid her in the snow, carefully scooping water onto the cut. Rosie struggled to pull her leg away. Raymond leaned against her, applying just enough pressure to keep her still. Good girl, Rosie, he whispered. Good girl. He doctored the bleeding cut with cold water until he felt that it was clean. Then he carried her back to the hollow and laid her gently on the sleeping bag. The sun was out now, sneaking through the bare branches of the trees. For the rest of the day, Raymond tried to keep himself busy. Every couple of hours, he pulled Rosie to the front of the hollow and packed snow around the swollen paw. It had doubled in size since the morning, but the bleeding had stopped. Rosie tried to lick the cut, and Raymond had to stay on her to keep her from overdoing it. As the sun set, Raymond grew increasingly worried. He hadn't eaten since the squirrel, and his stomach growled in protest. His body ached from the day's events as he tucked himself into the sleeping bag. He wrapped his arms around his dog and said a silent prayer that she would be okay. She had to be okay.